The city never noticed him at first. Men like him are trained by life to blend into the cracks between moments. This story doesn't begin in Los Angeles, but in a nameless childhood where silence was louder than shouting. He learned early that attention was dangerous and invisibility was power. He watched adults say one thing and mean another, where cruelty arrived without warning and left without apology. He grew up studying faces the way others study books, memorizing the slight tightening of a jaw before anger, the downward glance that preceded a lie. While other children dreamed loudly, he dreamed privately, teaching himself that secrets survived longer than truths, that control was quieter than chaos, and that patience endless. Disciplined patience was the most dangerous talent a person could possess. Education didn't shape him. It refined him. He was never the brightest student nor the weakest, always hovering in the safe middle where teachers forgot names and classmates forgot faces. Beneath that ordinary surface, his mind was building corridors of logic and obsession, fueled by curiosity about limits. How far could something be pushed before it broke? How much pressure could a person endure before revealing their real self? He read anatomy for structure, psychology for motive, and crime stories not for the thrill, but for the mistakes. He noted that criminals were undone not by intelligence, but by ego, impatience, or the need to be seen. His rule for life became simple. Never act until you understand everything around you, and never leave behind anything that could understand you in return. His career was unremarkable, jobs that left no emotional residue and allowed movement without explanation. Los Angeles in the 1940s was the perfect environment for him, a city swollen with war-returned men, hopeful women, and broken dreams. A place where pasts were shed like old coats and nobody asked too many questions. He arrived quietly, absorbing its rhythms, learning its geography, understanding that cities, like people, have pressure points. His lifestyle was disciplined, almost dull. Nights were spent walking, not drinking, listening, not speaking. He observed how people performed versions of themselves, how hope bent under financial strain, and how loneliness made people trust too easily. It was in these observations that something inside him began to sharpen, a detached fascination with the moment a person realized the world was not going to save them. Elizabeth Short wasn't important to him for who she was, but for what she represented, a person suspended between promise and obscurity, both visible and invisible. The crime that would shock the nation didn't erupt from sudden madness, but from a long, silent accumulation of thought. He believed true power lay not in destruction, but in controlling the narrative, forcing the world to look exactly where he wanted, while never revealing where he stood. What followed horrified investigators not because of its brutality, but because of its precision. The act was a message in a language they couldn't translate, a disruption so calculated it mocked their methods. As newspapers exploded and fear spread, the killer didn't flee. He observed, reading every article, tracking every theory, satisfied that the city was reacting exactly as he predicted. Confusion had bloomed faster than clarity. The investigation became a mirror of its own limitations. Overwhelmed detectives chased false leads, public hysteria amplified rumors, and the media rewarded speculation over accuracy. Through it all, the killer remained still. He understood that movement creates mistakes, and that silence forces others to speak for you. In that slow unraveling, he felt something close to satisfaction, a validation of a worldview formed long ago. That order is fragile, and certainty is an illusion. As years passed, the case cooled. He adapted seamlessly, aging into obscurity as effortlessly as he had once slipped into the city. He carried no trophies, no need to confess. The act was a single statement delivered into history and then abandoned. When death eventually claimed him quietly, unremarkably, it came without revelation or justice, only the continuation of mystery. He left the world exactly as he entered it, unnoticed, unresolved, and unanswered. And the unsettling truth that remains is this: the most dangerous individuals are not those driven by chaos, but by patience. Those who understand systems better than they understand themselves. Evil doesn't always announce its arrival. Sometimes it just studies, waits, and disappears, leaving behind only questions that outlive everyone searching for answers. As investigators tried to restore order, they found themselves drowning in noise. Every citizen suddenly believed they were closer to the truth than the very people assigned to protect them. The killer understood this transformation better than anyone. He knew the chaos wasn't created by the act itself, but by the reaction to it, a reaction he had predicted with unnerving accuracy long before the city realized. It had lost control of its own story. Police departments worked tirelessly, but every step forward fractured into 10 contradictory paths. Anonymous letters, false confessions, and self-appointed informants flooded stations with theories fueled more by imagination than evidence. The killer watched this all unfold with a detached interest. He knew that once an investigation becomes public entertainment, truth takes a backseat to sensation. Every headline just diluted clarity, turning the case into a living thing that fed on speculation. In an era when Los Angeles was already a city of illusion, it was now being asked to face something terrifyingly real without the comfort of a script. Suspects emerged one after another. Men with troubled pasts, men desperate for attention, men whose stories sounded convincing until you looked a little closer. Each time authorities thought they were nearing a breakthrough, the case slipped through their fingers again, leaving only frustration and embarrassment. All the while, the killer remained invisible. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he had designed himself to be forgettable. He understood that investigators search for extremes, for obvious abnormalities, for people who stand out. They never realized that the most effective disguise is normality itself, a truth he had mastered since childhood. Meanwhile, the media continued to shape perception, building myths where facts were scarce and assigning meaning where none could be proven. As the public devoured these stories, fear began to seep into daily life. Doors were locked earlier, strangers were questioned longer, and neighbors were suspected quietly. In this way, the killer's influence spread far beyond a single act, infecting the psychology of an entire city without him ever needing to be present. Fear, once planted, needs no further tending to grow. Throughout all this, the killer's lifestyle didn't change, and that was his greatest strength. He moved through the city without urgency, without any deviation from his routine. He blended seamlessly into a population now hyper-focused on identifying monsters, never realizing that monsters don't always look monstrous. As the years went by, investigators aged, retired, or were reassigned. The case began to lose momentum, its edges blurring with time, its urgency softened by newer crises and distant wars. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the investigation transitioned from an active pursuit to a historical burden. But the killer never underestimated time's ability to resurrect the past. He understood that unresolved mysteries never truly die. They just sleep, waiting for a new generation to awaken them. He paid close attention to anniversaries, documentaries, and books that revived interest, noting how each retelling shifted details and introduced new suspects. The story had escaped his control and become something larger, something shaped by collective imagination rather than evidence, and this fascinated him. As decades passed, amateur detectives emerged, convinced they could solve what professionals could not. They dissected photographs, reread transcripts, and built elaborate theories. The killer observed these efforts with a quiet amusement, knowing that without the foundational truth, even the most meticulous analysis eventually collapses on itself. While some theories came dangerously close in spirit, none ever pierced the veil completely. When truth is buried under decades of distortion, it becomes indistinguishable from fiction. The most unsettling part of this phase wasn't that the killer remained free, but that the city slowly normalized the mystery. It absorbed the tragedy into its cultural identity, turning horror into history. In doing so, Los Angeles unknowingly fulfilled the killer as unspoken goal, transforming a singular act into an eternal question. A solved crime fades, but an unsolved one evolves, haunting generations long after those involved are gone. As the killer aged quietly, carrying his secret without confession or acknowledgement, he understood something profound. Justice depends not just on evidence, but on timing, clarity, and restraint. By the time the world began to change in ways no investigator of the 1940s could have predicted, the Black Dahlia case had already drifted into a strange half-existence. It was neither alive nor forgotten, suspended somewhere between official archives and our collective imagination. And this is where our story truly begins, not with a sudden breakthrough, but with slow erosion. Time doesn't destroy truth all at once. It wears it down gently, reshaping memories, thinning evidence, and turning certainty into mere interpretation. The killer understood this better than anyone. Time was always his most reliable ally, requiring no elaborate planning, no added risk, only patience. As the decades passed, the case files yellowed, the witnesses aged, and their recollections softened at the edges, becoming more like stories than testimonies. Investigators who once chased down solid leads now had to rely on second-hand accounts. New technologies promised revolutionary answers, but often delivered even more questions. Science, after all, can only work with what remains. And what remained of the Black Dahlia case was incomplete, fragmented, and contaminated by years of public speculation. The killer watched all of this from a distance, aware that every passing year increased the odds that his identity would dissolve permanently into the fog of uncertainty surrounding the case. Countless books were written, documentaries were produced, and new theories were presented with confident authority. Each one claimed to have finally solved the mystery, and each one ultimately collapsed under scrutiny. Why? Because they were built not on truth, but on narrative convenience. They selected facts that fit their conclusions, rather than letting the facts guide them to a conclusion. In this frenzy of retrospective certainty, the killer recognized a strange paradox. The more people talked about the case, the less likely it was that anyone truly understood it. Obsession has a way of narrowing our focus, blinding us to alternative interpretations while convincing us of our own objectivity. The long list of suspects proposed over the years tells us more about our society than about the crime itself. It reveals our cultural anxieties, our moral panics, and our evolving understanding of human psychology. As these suspects were paraded through public discourse, judged and dismissed without any resolution, the real killer remained untouched, protected by ambiguity and the sheer absence of definitive proof. And in that protection lies a disturbing truth. Justice without certainty just becomes accusation. And accusation without resolution eventually becomes a form of entertainment. Meanwhile, the killer's own life moved toward its quiet conclusion, unmarked by confession or any search for redemption. He never believed in absolution, only in completion. As age stripped him of his physical strength, it also stripped away the relevance of fear. He was a man who had long since accepted that his secret would likely die with him, not as an act of defiance, but as a natural consequence of a world that had chosen spectacle over substance. In his final years, he didn't revisit the past with guilt, but with a cold, analytical eye. He reflected on how the system had failed, not because of incompetence, but because it was simply overwhelmed by the sheer volume of attention. What haunted him most wasn't the thought of being discovered, but of being misinterpreted. He feared that history would misunderstand his motives entirely, reducing a complex act to a simple caricature. Yet even that concern eventually faded. He recognized that meaning is ultimately assigned by the survivors, not the perpetrators. Once an act enters public memory, it no longer belongs to the individual who committed it. It belongs to the culture that consumes it, reshapes it, and retells it endlessly. As society evolved, the case became a symbol invoked in discussions of institutional failure, media ethics, and the dark psychology of obsession. In this symbolic form, the Black Dahlia ceased to be a person and became an idea. And ideas, unlike people, cannot be arrested, interrogated, or buried. In that transformation lies the final irony. A crime originally rooted in an extreme act of control had escaped all control, becoming a permanent fixture of American folklore. The sobering realization is that time didn't just conceal the killer. It actively collaborated with him. It amplified ambiguity, erased the sharp edges of fact, and allowed uncertainty to harden into a lasting legacy. When evidence fades and stories multiply, the truth doesn't vanish. It fragments. And in those fragments, everyone sees something different, ensuring that the mystery survives long after everyone who lived it is gone. This is about what remains when every reasonable path has been exhausted and the world is forced to sit with an agonizing uncertainty. As the years passed, the last generation directly connected to the case began to fade into history. The detectives, the witnesses, the family members, they all slowly departed, taking their first-hand memories with them. And as they did, the Black Dahlia story transformed. It morphed from an active investigation into a dark inheritance, a modern folktale passed down through books, documentaries, late-night conversations, and the quiet, persistent obsessions of amateur sleuths. It was no longer owned by police files, but by our collective imagination. The killer, now certainly long gone, achieved something far more enduring than a simple escape. He achieved erasure through silence. Think about it. There was no dramatic deathbed confession, no hidden letter discovered decades later in a dusty attic, no sudden alignment of old evidence that brought a moment of clarity crashing into the present. The silence was absolute. And that absence, that profound lack of an ending, became the ending itself. Because unresolved crimes don't really conclude. They echo. They reverberate through the years, and in that echo society reveals its deepest discomforts. Our inability to accept that not all questions have answers, that not all stories obey the rules of narrative justice, and that sometimes the universe simply refuses to provide closure no matter how desperately we demand it. The story of Elizabeth Short became a ghost story, haunting the cultural landscape of Los Angeles and beyond, a constant reminder of a debt that was never paid. The true moral tension of the Black Dahlia case isn't just in the horrific act itself, but in the aftermath, in how institutions, the media, and individuals responded to it. The initial, earnest pursuit of truth gradually transformed into something else, a ravenous hunger for certainty. And when that certainty proved to be unattainable, it was replaced by a chaotic storm of accusation, speculation, and obsession. In that transformation, something vital was lost. The case stopped being about Elizabeth Short, the human being, the aspiring actress, the daughter, the woman with dreams and flaws. She became a symbol, a puzzle. The mystery became a territory to be claimed, a battle over who could claim authority over its interpretation, who could profit, either financially or through reputation, from their proximity to the tragedy. It's a chilling look at how we as a society can consume a person's story until the person herself is gone. The killer's greatest weapon was never just his intellect or his meticulous planning. It was his restraint. It was his absolute refusal to speak in a world that is addicted to explanation. His silence was a vacuum, and it forced others to rush in and fill the void. Every theory, every accusation, every book written, every film made, every attempt to resolve the case without definitive evidence only thickened the fog surrounding it. This teaches us a haunting and powerful lesson. When the truth is fragile, Excessive noise doesn't illuminate it. It shatters it. Justice pursued without discipline, without a strict adherence to facts, risks becoming indistinguishable from exploitation. The media frenzy, the false confessions, the finger-pointing, all of it created a cacophony that may have drowned out the one quiet signal that could have led to the truth. The killer didn't just hide. He let the world hide him behind its own noise. Decades later, modern audiences revisit the case. Armed with forensic psychology, DNA technology, and the vast resources of the internet, we often believe ourselves to be closer to the answer than anyone who came before. We feel smarter, better equipped. We run the facts through new filters, analyze the old photographs with fresh eyes, and connect dots that might have been missed. Yet, for all our advancements, we face the exact same fundamental obstacle that stumped the investigators of 1947, the complete and total absence of definitive proof. Without that core piece of evidence, a weapon, a reliable witness, a confession, everything else is just informed speculation. And so, in that absence, the case continues to function as a mirror. It reflects the biases, the fears, and the deep-seated assumptions of whoever dares to examine it. In the 40s and 50s, the theories often reflected the anxieties of that era fears about rogue surgeons, shadowy Hollywood figures, and the perceived moral decay of post-war society. Today, our theories might involve more complex psychological profiling or intricate conspiracies that resonate with our own distrust of institutions. The mystery adapts to each new era without ever resolving, because the truth of it was never preserved intact. It was scattered across time, fragmented by speculation, and distorted by the very act of being retold over and over again. What does this mean for Elizabeth Short? It means her identity remains tragically tethered to the gruesome manner of her death. She is the Black Dahlia, a name she never knew in life, a name that forever binds her to her killer. We are left with a crime that is perfectly famous and perfectly unsolved. The killer's silence granted him anonymity, but it also cursed his victim to an eternity of being known only for her final, horrific moments. He didn't just take her life. He took control of her story, leaving behind a legacy of questions that we can't seem to stop asking, even when we know there may be no answers left to find. The echo continues, a permanent fixture in the architecture of American crime lore, a testament to the enduring power of a single, unbroken silence. Perhaps the final, unsettling truth is that we don't want it to be solved. Not really. Because as long as the mystery exists, it provides a canvas for our own narratives. It allows us to play detective, to be the one who might finally see what everyone else missed. The Black Dahlia case is more than a crime. It's a cultural phenomenon, a dark campfire story that we tell ourselves to explore the limits of human cruelty and the frustrating, humbling limits of human knowledge. The killer is gone, the evidence is cold, and all that's left is the story. A story without an end. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we can never let it go. The case may be closed, but criminology never sleeps. Like and subscribe join Criminology, and step deeper into the dark with us.